Thanks very, very much. Thank you, Adam, for a glowing introduction. Thanks also to Mark, who's operating our film. I should explain that this is state-of-the-art place, but our technology didn't really match theirs. So Denis has been working night and day to transfer what we have into a format which would play here. So effectively, they've made a movie which we're going to have to pause every time we show a slide. So we are praying that it will work. But we will be doing it in a very old-fashioned way. We'll be saying, next slide, please, okay, like they used to do at school. So we will hope this will work. Thank you for coming. I'd like to say thank you to Carrie Wooden as well for putting all this together. Let me introduce, if I may, my partners. You probably know who I am, because I make a nuisance of myself in various ways. I make music, I do astronomy, I occasionally try to speak up for animals. And stereoscopy has been a passion all my life. And it's brought me in touch with some amazing people. Two of them stand beside me today. Next to me is Denis Pellerin. He's an extraordinary scholar and photohistorian, and it's really thanks to him that we know what these Diableries, devilments, are all about. And we'll get into this in a minute. But ladies and gentlemen, Denis Pellerin, quite amazing. And Paula, the final member of our triumvirate, that's not the right word because that means three men, doesn't it? But anyway, the final member of our writing team is Paula. She is later the Smithsonian Institution. Now, institution means something different in America. Institution means somewhere where you put where you're dysfunctional in Britain, doesn't it? But institute, it is the Smithsonian Institution. She's a photo archivist, and again, she has an interest and a passion for stereoscopic pictures which goes back many, many years. Ladies and gentlemen, Paula Fleming. Right, we're going to see if this works. I'm going to say next slide, please. Do we dim the lights here? Are we dimming the lights a bit? Yes. And please go ahead, start the film. This is it in the hands. Next slide, please. And the next. There we go. So now we're opening it up, and you'll see that the first thing that comes to view is a very intriguing list on the inside of the cover, and you'll see that there are actually 75 views in all. 72 views, and they all have names. And inside are the cards themselves. We're going to cheat a little bit here because the cards we're going to see are not from this box. But next, please. One of the cards will look like this. Now, you're all familiar with stereo. We don't have to explain it to you. We're not used to lecturing to such an incredibly educated audience. So you don't need introducing to the idea of stereo, but you may not have seen these particular things. This is a stereo card, but it's a special kind. It's a tissue view, and tissue views were made exclusively in France, and instead of hand coloring them on the front, which was the normal way to treat a stereo card, they hand colored them on the back. And they were a tissue, so they were quite transparent, and when you held them up to the light, the colors would come through. Now, in addition, for the Diableries, they pricked out the eyes and jewelry and other effects like swords and things. They would scratch and they would make marks on the prints from the back. And so when you hold them up to the light, really extraordinary things happen. The eyes will glow at you. So if we go to the next slide. Next, please. Here you can see we're starting to illuminate it from the back. So the colors are starting to come through. And you can't really see the eyes glowing yet. But if we go to the next slide. Next, please. Here we are. It's in the viewer. We can see the colors quite clearly now. This is a Victorian stereoscope. And I don't know how familiar you are with these things, but they were beautifully made from all sorts of fruit woods and mahogany. This is a Brewster stereoscope. And you can see it's very cleverly designed so that you can illuminate the slide from the top through this hole or from the back for a tissue. Next, please. This is turning, I see, I'm keeping you in suspense. if your tissue should happen to fall to pieces, and occasionally they do, this is what you would see. And you can see that the eyes have been, we're looking at the back, and all these little red dots are pieces of gel which have been put on top of the holes which have been made for the eyes of the skeletons from this particular view. Next slide, please. There we go. Now we get the idea. So the colour has been applied to the back of the prints. These are albumin prints, egg white prints, and the gels are applied to the tissue, which is applied to the back of that. The whole thing is sandwiched within a sort of double envelope of a kind of mat, a cardboard mat. Next slide, please. So now this is what we would see if the slide is actually in the stereoscope. I've lost my glasses. No, I haven't. Well, it's of course not what we'd see in the viewer because this is a mono view. So next slide, please. Let's see the magic. Yeah. Now we even get a wow from you. So that's very good. So bye-bye. So we love this. This is a great example of the Diableries. Finally, we see what they are. And I think if we go to the next slide, next one, please, we will see more magic. Yes. This finally is the result of all that technology which you've just seen. The eyes glow, the colors come out, and they're just beautifully made artifacts. And we've tried to reproduce them, and I can tell you it's really incredibly difficult with today's technology to do anything like as good as this. It's not even easy to do it on the internet. You know, you can do transformations, but the true magic of holding this in your hand and putting it in a stereoscope is hard to describe, really. We'll look at La Bourse, which is the stock exchange. It's a little taster of what's to come. We're also looking at a signature here which says Aber, and we'll learn a lot more about him in a minute. There are two main sculptors for this main series. Next slide, please. You're doing a great job, Mark. Thank you.
It's Tom.
Tom. You do a great job, Tom. This is a modern stereoscope, and this is the one that I designed myself because, oh no, we can't go back, can we? I'm in big trouble now from Paula. You're not supposed to see this. But you just glimpsed an owl stereoscope, and if you're lucky enough to be able to purchase a Diableries book later on, which you might be, and we will sign it hopefully, the owl stereoscope is included. And the owl stereoscope really does everything that the Victorian stereoscope did and a little bit more. So we'll return to that in a minute. Now I'm going to stop, and Paula's going to take over for a while. She's going to give you a little bit of context to what was actually happening in the world when stereoscopy was introduced, and in particular, Diableries were introduced.
Great.
You went backwards. Well done.
Oh,
wonderful, Tom. Thank you.
Yes, you didn't see that next view. Wipe that from your memory. In order to provide you with a little background on the Diableries, we have to go back almost 160 years to the late 1850s in England and France. And at that time, obviously, photography was not nearly as technical as it is today, but it was every bit as exciting a period for the photographers. They no longer were constrained by one-off processes such as daguerreotypes, which you had one daguerreotype, you got one image. And they were also finally technically adept at the new wet plate negative process, which allowed them to print many, many copies of images and sell them to an open market. And all of these angles encouraged them to come up with very creative and new subjects. Next slide, please. Such as this early British attempt at humor.
Hey.
Typical British humor.
It's titled The Skeletons Carouse and humorously subtitled The Bone Vivants. Now, some of you might find this disconcerting because the photographer, who is anonymous and probably for good reasons, used real skeletons. But it was also distressing to the British people at the time because grave robbing was on the rise. So a good attempt and something that would eventually help to set the background for the Diableries, but not a winner. Next slide, please. There we go. This is Scrooge and Marley. And this was a wonderful, well-accepted view that was popular because, of course, Charles Dickens was also very much in the public eye. Sir David Brewster, who you certainly all know, had noticed that if people moved when they were having their daguerreotypes made, it made kind of a ghost image. And when the photographers had the wet plate negatives, they found that if they half exposed them and had someone in the scene and then they left and they finished exposing it, they could have a ghost. And they went crazy with this. There were tons and tons of these views. And this spectral image also helped to contribute to that feeling of the era. Next slide, please. At the same time in France, the French were absolutely besotted with everything to do with devil and devilish themes. This is a photograph that was made by a man by the name of Henri Lefort. Sorry, Denis, that's the best I can do. And he used real people and he set them in very hellish situations. Next slide, please. This is one of several of his scenes in hell, and what more beautifully devilish scene can you have than a cauldron bubbling? And there are also demons and all sorts of spectral figures. But when you combine what the British were doing and attempting and the French's love of devilish themes, that puts us in a perfect place for the beginning of the Diableries.
Next slide, please. So we're going now to go through Series A. There are actually 7 series of Diableries, and Series A is the earliest. It is also the largest with 72 cards, and it's probably the most interesting because there are lots of references to what was going on in France at the time. Series A spans over 15 years. It was started in 1859, 1860. And the last cards were published around 1874. And Series A was the work of 2 major sculptors. One was called Aber. You've seen his signature on the pillars in the stock exchange picture. And the other one was called Hennetier. Can we have the next slide, please? So this is probably the first ever Diableries, and the most interesting thing about it is that it was not actually included in Series A. It was copyrighted in 1860, and it shows hell. This is called just enfer, hell in French, and it shows something which with which the audience would have been very familiar, because this is exactly what the Catholic Church was teaching people at the time. This is where you're going to go if you've been a naughty boy or naughty girl. So you will be sentenced to an eternity of well, boiling in a cauldron or roasting in hell, as you wish. So the first Diableries were very much religion related. And this piece, for example, could have been exhibited in a church because nobody would have objected. This is exactly what people were used to. And in France at the time, there was a guy named Alphonse Daudet who wrote a story called The Curé de Cucugnan, the Cucugnanian priest. And it's about a priest who has a dream, and he goes to hell in his dream, and he meets his parishioners there, and they are all boiling in a such cauldron. So it was something they were very familiar with, and it's not very funny. Next slide, please. Not very funny, but a bit grim, but there are some elements. Can we have the colored version, please? Next slide. Okay, so this is the same in color, so a bit more dramatic, of course. Next slide, please. So if you look at the details, the faces of the skeletons are nice, and there is the skeleton on the right is actually praying. He wants to get me out of here, please. And there's the only humorous part of the slide is the skeleton on the left biting his fellow sufferer's arm. So either to test whether he's hard-boiled or not, or maybe because he's just narrow-minded.
Oh, that
Next
was
slide,
bad.
please.
We never know what he's going to come up with.
Next slide, please.
Continuing the religious theme, this is a view by Initié, and it's the resurrection or judgment day, and it's definitely, obviously, an early version of thunderbolts and lightning.
Very, very frightening. We like to set each other up.
Ta-da. Clearly, as Denis pointed out, the church would have been very pleased with this view, and it's obviously a serious view, but yet it's also a touching scene. And if you look on the lower left, you can see Initié's name is on one of the tombstones. Have you got that? And behind that, there is a man and woman kissing. And we like to think that that's Initié and his wife. And one of the reasons that we believe that is if you look at the broken column that's next to them, it's almost an exact replica of one that adorns their family vault. Next slide, please. This is one of Hébert's religious views, and this is the Last Judgment. And the only thing I really want to say about this is that the artists drew their inspiration from many, many sources. And this one was inspired by Michelangelo's Chiron, which is on the Sistine ceiling, and it's almost a direct copy of it. Next slide.
You'll notice we're still on religious subjects here, but this is not going to be the case for much longer. This one's a bit grim, really. It's the Temptation of St. Anthony, which was a very popular subject for painters and artists and sculptors at the time. So this wouldn't have surprised anyone, particularly at the time. He's being tempted through all his senses, if you look carefully, through his eyes, his ears, his nose, etc. He's being tempted with horrible music on the right. And even his pet pig is being tortured, which is a bit sad, it seems to me. But this was a very popular theme because it also gave artists the chance to include a few scantily dressed women as temptation. So you'll see that quite a bit in the up and coming slides. Next, please. This is the sequel, The Miseries of Saint Antoine, of St. Anthony, and things have now got worse. He's being tempted and tortured in a much worse way. The lady's got even less clothes on. The music is even more diabolical. He's being lectured to by a politician, which is probably the worst torture of all, I should think. And they've killed his pig, which is very, very sad. They've also burned his house, as you can see in the background. But you can see, in the back, by the way, is a fountain, which I'm told by Denis represents hope for him. It represents the fountain of hope. And that represents the pillar of his Christian belief, which is enabling him to resist the temptations. But you can see the quality of these things is incredible. The sculpture is so beautifully proportioned, and it's all fashioned to be for the medium, for the stereoscopic medium. So everything is in its place. There's an incredible sensation of depth, and the actual stereoscopic composition is superlative, I would say, and you'll see more of this as time goes on. This is still Initié, who I think believe is the real founder, the real creator of the idea of the Diableries. But very soon he will be joined more and more by his colleague, Hébert. Next slide, please.
Right, so this is where things change. Well, so far you've seen lots of religious used, but this one is a bit different. It represents a scene in Carnival. Carnival was very popular in Paris. It began in January and lasted until February, and there were lots of balls and masked balls, and here, well, people are having fun. You can see people dressed up as kings, and the devil is actually pouring champagne into somebody's glass, and there is this man on the left. Now look at him. Everybody would have recognized him as Robert Macaire, who was a popular character from a play. The play was not very good, but one day the main actor decided to turn it into a comedy, and then suddenly it became very successful, and lots of people wrote about this character, and then the play was banned, and so the character, actually was used by caricaturists, lithographers. Honoré Daumier did over 100 lithographs with this character, who was the archetype of the villain. Now, the interesting thing is that in all the caricatures showing, or drawings showing Robert Macaire, is clean-shaven. Next slide, please. So here, as you can see, it's a bit of an extreme close-up, but you can see it very, very nicely. He's wearing a goatee beard and a moustache. Now, why? Next slide, please. Well, because he is referring to that man. That man was Louis Napoleon Bonaparte. The photo was taken in 1858, a few months after he escaped being blown apart in an attempt on his life. And so he was the ruler of France. He had been the first president of France. He was elected in 1848, and then he decided he liked being, at the top, and so he staged a coup d'etat, and he became emperor. But anyway, the publisher, the first publisher of the Diableries, was a Republican, not in the American meaning of the word, but he was for the French Republic. He believed in the French Republic, and he never forgave Napoleon for this coup. And so he decided that, well, maybe we could use the Diableries for political satire. And this is what he did. So next slide, please. You will find the same goatee and moustache here in the face of Napoleon III. Next slide, please. And so Napoleon became the archetype of the villain in the Diableries. And soon, next slide, please, he became the devil himself. It was not enough to show him as Robert Macaire. It became the devil himself. This one is called Satan's Women Bathing. Now, this is very interesting. Well, you can see the devil whipping away some very interested skeletons who wants to touch the naked women on the left. And if you look at the picture closely, there is a very interesting detail. Next slide, please. So here is the very interesting detail. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess that was not the one you were expecting. Well, the interesting detail was the rock in the background, because it is a real rock in Biarritz in France. Next slide, please. And Biarritz was a place where Emperor Napoleon III and his wife used to stay and have about a month holiday in September every year. So this is an actual reference to Biarritz, and the lighthouse is also Biarritz lighthouse. So this is a satire of the regime, and of course a satire of Napoleon III and his women. Napoleon III was known to be a womanizer. He had several mistresses, and so this is a clever way of making fun of the regime. And it was a bit dangerous because you could go to prison if you were caught. But fortunately for us, Lamiche, Habert, and Hennetier were never caught. Next slide, please. Well, you've seen that one already as a card. So now here it is as a stereo, and it shows a review of the Infernal Guard. Now this is another, of course, satire, because it makes reference to the Imperial Guard. And in 1860, when the police raided the publisher's place, they found an actual photo of Napoleon III reviewing the Imperial Guard, and underneath was the caption, "Review of the Infernal Guard." Well, The police didn't arrest Lamiche this time, but a few weeks later they were back and they sent him to prison because he was also publishing naughty pictures. So next slide, please.
Ah. Well, this will be me. We're now entering yet another phase of the Diableries. We've seen the highly religious content. We've now seen the political and seditious content. Now we're looking at something which is much more fun, and it starts to look like being in hell might not be so bad after all, because you get musicians. It does seem that the music must be pretty awful, pretty diabolical, because you can see the people at the back. They look a little bit like the judges on X Factor, don't they? They're obviously hating it and sticking their fingers in their ears and screaming in pain. The musicians are just getting on with it. But you see the man who's really enjoying himself at the top left is, of course, the devil, because he likes people being in pain. But I love this slide, I must say. If you look at the drumsticks, how they come out at you, it's all been so beautifully planned in stereoscopic space. And here we have the Infernal concert by the Infernal Band, and we will be seeing more of them as time goes on. Next slide, please. I think we have a coloured version of this. Yes, we do. All the eyes come out. I should mention to you, you're looking at extensively restored slides here, because they don't always come to you in this kind of condition. So some poor fool, usually me, has to be obsessively sitting and taking out all the dots and scratches and imperfections for very often weeks for just one of these slides. But the reward you get at the end is quite amazing, because the whole view becomes quite transparent. We also repositioned the eyes, because the eyes were sometimes poked rather indiscriminately, so they floated in the wrong place in space. So these are sort of reconditioned cards, the best we can do to give you the experience which we think the artists wanted to give you. Next slide, please, but enjoy this one. This looks like another TV show, doesn't it? Really? I don't know if it's Strictly Come Dancing or something. It's not actually, we're not looking at judges at the back, we're looking at these assistant skeletons holding up numbers for the lottery. And you can see quite clearly that the man in the middle, the devil himself, is holding the winning ticket, and he's looking very smug. But this is hell, of course, the devil wins everything, and we're going to see that more and more. The prizes are displayed all around, and he's going to win them all. In fact, beside his left arm, there's a skeleton bringing on a beautiful meerschaum pipe, which should have been a rare treasure in Paris at that time. So this again is fun. This is not a religious comment. It's not a social, well, it's certainly not a political comment, but it's a parody of things which were going on at the time in Paris. Next slide, please. I think we have this in colour as well. Yeah. This is really nice. And the next, please.
Now, this is one of several slides that show a railway. And as you know, our railway was supposed to have been invented by the devil. People were still afraid of traveling by train in the 1860s, the early 1860s, and they thought, even the Pope at the time said, railway, hellway. So it was definitely an invention of the devil. And please bear this card in mind, because you will see more about that card later on at the end of the talk. So this is the Purgatory Station, and the devil is riding the train, and is holding a hook to get some souls. So these are probably the people who spent some time in purgatory and didn't make it to heaven, so now they are going to hell. So this is the train getting them to hell. You will notice that the engine bears number 13. There are 5 slides showing number 13 in the series A, and this is one of them. Can we have the colored version, please? Next slide. And if you look at the color, you will see look at the tunnel. Inside the tunnel, you will see some eyes appearing, glowing eyes appearing in the tunnel, which is even more dramatic. And of course, the engine is called Enfer, hell. Next slide, please.
Well, Satan isn't always gathering souls or meting out torture. Here he's giving a lovely dinner party. And we've included this for several reasons. One, to show you the wonderful artistic abilities of the sculptors. The figures of these were only about 8 inches tall. We can explain how we sorted that out later. But to provide even more depth with something that has a backdrop like this, you'll notice the figures in the background have been sculpted even smaller to increase that illusion of depth. But the other reason that we included this slide is it's a very good example of the kind of mysteries and things that they put into these cards, and that you can have a devilishly good time teasing them out. If you look closely at the skeleton in the front center there, he's the one wearing the pants and he's serving fish. And there is a skeleton that is pouring liquid into a jar labeled wine. If you add that all together, and the devil is blessing it all with his left hand, not his right hand, you realize that Henriette is showing you a hellish version of the wedding at Cana. Next slide, please. Now we're having a bicycle race. At the time, this view was produced, it was copyrighted in the 1870s, but it was produced a little earlier. Bicycles were a novelty. The French were the first to have a bicycle race, and that was only a few years before this card was made. And Hebert decided that if the French can have a bicycle race, so can Satan. Now, they're riding what were known as bone shakers. They had no springs, they had no chains, and the wheels, the bigger the wheels were, the faster they went. And so you can just guess who's going to win this race, can't you? Next slide, please. This also shows you the absolutely glorious tinting that can come when you backlight these views. Next view, please. This glorious detail of the devil also shows you how wonderful these sculptors were. If you look how beautifully the muscles and everything is done, it's absolutely perfect. Next slide, please. And here he is in all his glorious color, getting ready to win the race. Next slide.
You can see why we get so excited about these things, perhaps. This is the visit of the sun to Satan, which is obviously a very significant event. They're all in their finery, and the sun comes in with all his attendants, all with their fantastic headpieces. Let's go to the next slide right away so we can see the detail. It's beautifully done. They've not only pricked the eyes, they've scraped the headdresses to make them glow as well. And the colours are quite beautiful. You notice that Madame Satan is now a little bit older, and we're looking at a slightly different time period now. Denis will tell me what date this was.
This was after the Franco-Prussian War.
About 1873.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're looking here at something which perhaps symbolically represents hope, because they've been through a terrible time in the Franco-Prussian War, terrible deprivation in Paris. And this visit of Satan brings some new light and a vision of hope into hell. Next slide, please.
Well, the fun and games continue here, and this is Satan's gaming room. With this view, this shows one of the things that the sculptors liked to do, which was to pay homage to other artists of the time. And obviously the main theme is don't gamble with the devil, But with this, I'd like to call your attention really to the artwork on the wall in the back. See it up in upper left and upper right? With the upper left view, next slide, please. Albert is taking a copy of a work by an artist by the name of Gavarni, and this is his share of affections in London. Next slide, please. And this is another homage to Gavarni and his aged ladies of easy virtue, rather, ladies of negotiable affection, if you will. Next slide. And you can see how beautifully they've been incorporated in that, and it's something that you're likely to skip right over unless you really study it. Next slide, please. Okay, how many of you have postponed doing something until hell froze over? Now it's time, because it has frozen over. This is a really jolly, jolly scene. There's lots of motion and there's lots of movement. On the right, you see one skeleton has fallen, and he's just so happy about it all that we've called him Happy. He appears in many scenes. You'll also see Satan and his wife are having a lovely time skating. And in actual fact, both the emperor and the empress were good skaters. We'll have a detail of them in a minute. If you also look at the background in the bridge, you'll see this soon. Next slide, please. There they are in beautiful color. Next slide, please. And there are the central figures for you to enjoy. Next slide.
This is something you might not imagine that you would need in hell, people to put out the fires, but they do have firemen in hell, apparently. And they're all getting up to mischief, of course. None of them are doing their job properly. They're all having great fun. But there's another point to this. This is a kind of satire, and they've called it Les Pompiers de l'Enfer. And this sounds very similar to the expression Les Pompiers de Nanterre. It's a kind of pun in sound, because this was a song, and I only know this because I know Denis Pellerin, but one of the most popular songs in France at the time was Les Pompiers de Nanterre. Right? And people in France still know this song, apparently, and still sing it in brothels, I guess, wherever they sing.
Hellish places.
So everyone would have been familiar with what was being put forward here. Like many of these compositions, this is an Albert composition, and beautifully detailed. You can study this for ages and ages and keep finding out more things, more strange things that they're up to. Next slide, please. To see it in colour, it's well worth seeing in colour. You can see the effect they put on the flames there, so it all springs to life beautifully in colour. Denis usually sings the song at this point. But
please,
exactly.
Please, no.
Sorry,
no.
I'm a little hoarse.
Okay. So, maybe next time then. And the next slide, please. Now this slide has a lot of significance for us, as you'll see. The lady who's on the platform kicking her legs is Mademoiselle Satan. She's Satan's daughter, and she's obviously making a big noise here. She's effectively a kind of women's lib figure. You'll notice in one hand she's got a bottle of champagne, in the other she's got a glass. She's squeaking away, kicking her legs, and she's dressed in men's clothing, which was all a bit risque at the time. She's got an adoring audience, it seems, and I think they all look highly in approval. They seem to be mainly male. And there are a lot of strange allusions in this. You might be wondering why her attendants have these strange beak-like faces. And this seems to be something to do with the subjugation of women at the time, which was very real. So she's saying crinoline's in revolt here, and you can see some slogans written up on the archway above. She's advocating eccentricity of dress, of appearance. She's advocating the emancipation of vice and the augmentation of what I'm assured are buns, which means the hairdos. Bigger buns. She needs bigger buns. Yes, I think there's a reference there somewhere. So if we go to the next slide, we're going to discover a little more. Right. Here we see her audience in great detail. Crinoline en grève means exactly what?
On strike, yes.
On strike.
Yes, stop wearing crinolines.
And you can see Happy has been reused there in the center, waving
yes,
at you.
we see our skeletons again. And crinolines, of course, are a very big subject at the time because crinolines were responsible for many deaths. And you might find it amusing, but actually thousands of women perished in various ways from wearing crinolines, mainly from catching fire in them. And of course, they were so big that if somebody did have an accident and their dress caught fire, there was no way of getting out of the building, so it would spread like wildfire through the crinolines. So they were very much regarded as the work of the devil by women and by men whose lives were ruined by them because they couldn't keep up with the expense of making them. So next slide, please. We see even more. Here she is in close-up, and take a good look. And have you ever wondered how big these sculptures must have been? Let's go to the next slide. Next, please. This tells us. This is the only example we know of the sculptor Habert with his creation, Mademoiselle Satin. It was mono, and we've treated this to make it stereo. You're familiar with all this. But there he is with his beautiful creation, and she's all ready to go in the tableau. So we now know that these sculptures must have been about 9 inches or 10 inches tall. And the whole sculptures would have been a large tabletop, quite significant structures. As far as we know, none of them survive. Not one of the figures or the sets or anything have ever been found. And it would be wonderful if we could discover them. But I think all the indications are that the sets and the figures were reused as far as possible and then destroyed. So next slide, please. Is this me?
Yeah, this is you again.
It is me. Well, anybody notice the bridge in the background? I think we've seen that before when hell did freeze over. Now it's thawed out, and we're seeing a regatta. They're all in the water, having great fun. Next slide, please. But keep watching. Look at the lanterns and look at the eyes. They all spring into glorious nighttime jollity. There's one poor chap who seems to be drowning in the water, and you can see they're all looking in great concern, but I have the theory that they're trying to push him in rather than fish him out. And the devil is looking very happy as usual. A very complex scene. We're seeing more and more figures in these scenes. I don't know if you noticed, they're becoming a little bit baroque, but there will be further to go in this direction. Next slide, please. The detail. These are some of the onlookers. Continually amazes me how much expression and vitality and body language the sculptors managed to get into these figures, which don't have proper faces and don't have any hair. But they all look as if they're engaged in pursuits which are going on in their head. Next slide, please. Ah, yes, a detail of the poor drowning man. Nobody really cares because, of course, these guys are all dead anyway. So it's not going to make a lot of difference if he drowns. So he looks quite jolly about the whole thing. Next, please.
This is one of my favorite slides. It shows the entrance to hell. So it says on the door, "Abandon hope, all you enter here," over the gate. So it's a mixture, actually, of Dante's Inferno, of Greek mythology, and of 19th century vision of hell. If you look on the right, you can see Fluffy, the three-headed dog that was keeping hell. Or was it Fluffy? What was Fluffy's name, really?
Could have been Cerberus.
Yes, could have been, yeah, that's right. And here is just the caretaker. Talk to the caretaker, it says. And on the left, you can see a girl selling drinks, because it's your last chance to have a drink before you are sentenced to well, an eternity of suffering. And according to the latest estimates, by the way, eternity is the time it takes a Frenchman to understand the rules of cricket. So, can we have the next slide, please? So a detail here with a Cerberus on the right, and someone also offering to polish your boots before you go in, well, which is ridiculous because they are skeletons, they are not wearing any boots, but anyway. And the skeleton tipping his hat is showing is a sort of a ticket valid for entry, so he's allowed to go in. Next slide, please.
We threw this one in because we did a few presentations to the press and we couldn't resist. It's actually an amazing slide. There is so much symbolism in this slide. And of course, it's an indication. You start off with the fact that the journalist has two heads pointing in opposite directions. So journalists apparently were even two-faced in those days. So not a lot has changed. The lady to the right, what's that all about? Well, she's imprisoned. And she represents truth. So she's never going to get out of there. This really repays a long period of study, but a beautiful slide in its own right, I think. And the next, please. Well, we've been looking at Series A up to now. Might be the appropriate time to remind you. Series A, there are 72 of them. Remember, we saw that box with the list. But there were other series after this, and we're going to have a brief look at Series B now. Things have changed a bit now. Next slide, please. Series A is the most commonly found. These are actually quite rare. We particularly love this series because this seems to represent Ennetier, one of the two sculptors, going off on his own and doing his own thing. It seems like there was some kind of schism and he left the employ of Lamiche while Hebert stayed. So while Hebert is continuing with Series A, Ennetier is off on his own doing his particular art. And this to me is one of the most extraordinary Diableries ever. You can see he's expanded the medium. It no longer seems to be confined by its edges. It seems to go on forever into the background. It comes directly out towards you. And this extraordinary creation, flying in the air, supported by this wonderful fire-breathing bird, is collecting souls. It's called the descent of the unfaithful into hell. So they're being plucked up into the air before they descend into hell. There's something very interesting on the bottom left. And the whole scene is rather sinister, as you can see. But you see this couple, and it looks as if they at least might not be unfaithful, and maybe they are going to escape. But if you look very carefully, it says contract of marriage at the left-hand side, and the contract is scratched. Now, again, I only know this because of knowing Monsieur Pellerin, but in French folklore, if the contract of marriage is scratched, it means that there has been unfaithfulness. So this couple are either man and wife and have hidden secrets, or perhaps they're both married to someone else. In any case, they're not going to escape. The hook is headed towards them, and they too will descend into hell. And you can see underneath them is Paris, so there's no doubt as to what this is referring to. Next slide, please. Again, this is Series B, and we kind of like using the word B to mean Baroque, because really these become so phantasmagorical, so full of detail, that you can spend ages and ages studying them. I'm going to let Denis tell you about these little figures to the left, underneath the sign there.
So it's called a Festival Day in Hell, and if you look at the two figures on the left on the stage, above them is a sign saying "Living Phenomenon Devouring Men and Money." Well, it was a freak show actually, and the lady, if you look at the lady, she's telling off a guy, a little guy, and the little guy has a goatee beard and a moustache. Now that should ring a bell, and this is a very good portrait of Napoleon III, and the lady, of course, is his wife, Empress Eugenie. She was accused of being of spending a lot of money on clothes and dress and jewels, so of spending too much money, obviously. Next slide, please.
This is another one from Series B. There seems to be a rather strange number of these series. It's a bit chaotic. We don't even know for sure how many there are, but we think we found them all. Here's Satan on another planet, which I guess might be the moon, and he's looking through his telescope at the Earth, and I guess making sure that there is enough conflict and war going on so that he gets enough of his harvest of souls. There's great excitement, so he must have seen something, and the guy's blowing the horn at the right-hand side to summon everybody. This period was exactly the period of the war
In Italy.
In Italy.
in Italy, which was extensively fought by the French. And it's definitely one of my favourite slides. Again, Ennetier at his most strange and bizarre. Even his little titles are very bizarre, with strange flame-like edges. And it's called The Observatory of the Devil. Next, please. Well, now our brief excursion into B series. There is C series, which we don't have time to show you, but it's all in the book. I hope you enjoy. There is D series, there is E series, there is EH series. There's 7 in all, and it's all quite confusing unless you take it slowly. And I think we're the first people who ever actually deciphered where these series belong and put them into order, which has been a great voyage of discovery. This is a return to the A series, which I think we'd all say is the greatest period of the Diableries. This is right in the thick of it. It's preparations for war, departing in war. And this is the slide that we chose for the cover of our book. You'll notice the guy at the top, the trumpeting herald with his wings, quite an extraordinary, memorable figure. And if we go to the next slide, we sort of adopted him as our mascot. Oh, here we see him in colour, all of them in colour. Very beautiful. And the next slide, please. This is the book cover, just to drum it in, you know, just not that we're into hard sell or anything. So that's really our depiction of the Diableries, but we have a couple of little surprises for you. So the next slide, please. I mentioned there's a series EH. Now this is, I probably don't need to explain why it's called series EH, but there are 2 series which we did not manage to find all the cards for. Now, in a way that's frustrating, but in a way it's very exciting, because we thought if the book is out there, then maybe we will discover the missing cards. And one of the cards for series EH did in fact turn up just a few weeks ago. Somebody saw a card on an auction on eBay and got in touch. And next slide, please. Now, it's not the greatest quality. It's very grainy and was very faded. It took about 3 weeks of restoration for me to get it to look even that good. But it turns out to be a rather good view. By the time we get to EH, which is one of the later series, there is not much content, not so rich as the early days. But this correspondance de Satire means basically changing trains. It's about making a connection. And you can see it's a very bizarre kind of changing trains. The people are not getting out of one train and getting into another. The whole train is being laboriously lifted onto a different track. And it seems pretty obvious that they're heading for the lower track, which heads into a tunnel which presumably goes straight to hell. Again, there's a lot of detail, and we had a lot of fun deciphering this. You can see there's a man down here working points. There's another man up top who might be the devil working point at the top, but she looks a little bit like a woman to me. I'm not quite sure about this. But we were very excited to see that. There is now 1 card which we are missing. So if you have the book and you have a quick look through, we'd love to hear from anyone who has the card which we don't have yet. Now we have another surprise. The next slide, please. Who is Unanico? Well, they're a bunch of chaps who got in touch with us and have really changed our lives, because we always thought how amazing it would be to revisit this world of the Diableries and bring it to life. And they have started to do exactly that. So we're working together on a film, and I'd like to introduce you to Paul, who is going to come up and show you something which even I have not yet seen, which is his latest work in progress film of the Diableries. Paul, please welcome Paul from Unanico. I'm going to retire so I can see it properly.
Thank you, Brian, Denis, and Paula. Well, this is actually a world exclusive because, as Brian said, we have been working together with Brian, Denis, and Paula to bring some of these incredible things that you see here to life. We saw a presentation just like this and thought it would be incredible if this actually could move. We have a few challenges, and we are in the middle. What we're going to show you is really a work in progress. It's the first clip of a few seconds of what this is going to look like in the film. The challenges we have are to find the story that brings together, that knits together some of these cards. And I think we found a story which basically depicts one night in hell and tells the journey of one of these skeletons who we've picked out together with Brian, Paula, and Denis. And it's in fact the character called Happy that was indicated earlier. The second is the technique for actually making this, because these were all made as clay figures, but we toyed with doing this as stop motion, but in the end decided that CGI was the way to go. And you will be the judge as to whether this is working. It's something that we're working on right now. The next was music. Something like this deserves a really incredible soundtrack. And we're fortunate enough to be working together with Brian on the soundtrack to this film, which will be coming out later in the summer. The last thing is the stereoscopy. We really saw this as the cutting-edge technology of the 19th century when it came to stereoscopy. So we thought, what better than to bring this into the 21st century with some stereoscopic animation. And I think there's been a lot of talk about when stereoscopy is actually justified. And we really felt, as soon as we saw this, that this merited being told in the form of stereoscopic 3D animation. So it's a very short clip. It's quite a long introduction, but here is the work in progress of One Night in Hell.
We'd be very happy to answer questions if you'd like to get into anything. We're very open to discussion of any kind, or criticisms, or anything you like. So we are here at your service. Well done, Paul. Amazing. Well done, chaps.
Yes.
Brilliant. That's amazing. Really amazing. God. Yeah, the music's going to be pretty interesting. I went to Prague to record it, and basically I'm doing a, you're going to laugh, it's a version of the 1812 Overture, which seems very appropriate because the 1812 Overture, of course, includes the Marseillaise. It was written as a tribute to the original Napoleon. And of course, this would have been out of favor at the time. So it would be appropriate that the devil would be playing this music. And there is a little bit of guitar snuck in there. So it's going to be a little bit different. But I had a huge orchestra. I had great fun in Prague just recording this 1812. I always wanted my own version of the 1812, so now I got it. Tchaikovsky, of course. And I will be on a plane to Russia tomorrow, to the land of Tchaikovsky. Please.
With regard to the film, when that is due for release, and what's the plan for
where it will be shown.
Paul?
I don't know if you can you hear me? Not really. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
The film is going to be released in various different ways. There will be a theatrical release, and it's a short film at this stage, and I think it's going to be attached to a stereoscopic feature coming later in the year. It will also be shown on television for those few people who have stereoscopic 3D televisions. And then there is an app which will contain this film along with a new augmented reality experience also featuring the Diableries. And it's basically being released in multiple distribution channels.
Great. Sir? Mic? Yeah.
You'll end up with two mics.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Brian. I was wondering what you thought it was possibly about still imagery, which gives it the potential to be so much more profound than the moving image sometimes.
Interesting question. Yeah, I do kind of feel that. And I think there is no doubt that most of the stereoscopic artists of the Victorian age thought in those terms. They wanted their picture to be studied, and they wanted your eyes to move all around it and find out all the stories hidden in it. Very different from the philosophy of a 3D film like Avatar, where you just get one glimpse and it's gone. I sometimes wonder about that. I talked to James Cameron. I interviewed James Cameron for the Sky 3D documentary that we did on the history of stereo. And he said that really there is one point in every frame where your eyes are meant to be focused. Which is a big statement, really. Your eyes are actually, in a sense, not meant to be wandering around the huge image which is presented to you in the theatre. It's supposed to be all subliminal, and your eye just follows the action. And he places that sort of in the centre of the stereoscopic space. That's his philosophy. But yes, I find that I'm looking at these stereoscopic images for hours on end, and there is a certain magic to the still stereoscopic photograph, which is different from the still 2D photograph, which you just see as a thing very often. I think it's this business of the fact that you can walk around inside the image. You really feel with a good stereoscopic photo that you could walk in there and look around, get behind things and touch things. And I think that's its magic, really. But I can't really answer the question, but I think it's a very good question.
Can I just ask you something about the world that we've seen in the slides? I've got the book. I've had it since Christmas, but
great.
I've not looked at it in enough detail. I now realise this has been fascinating, having a guided tour of hell.
Right.
So what I'm now thinking is Orpheus in the Underworld, the other Offenbach opera, Voyage dans la Lune, which has a kind of diabolic court on the moon.
Yes, indeed.
And I'm also thinking about Starevich and his wonderful scenes when Starevich arrives in France, and of course Disney's Skeleton Dance.
I thought you were going to say Méliès. Yeah.
Well,
Méliès
it could be Méliès
of
too, of
course.
course, but I'm just
Yes.
thinking about the kind of the world that's depicted of these skeletons. You must have thought about this, and do any of those kind of coordinates make sense?
Well, Orpheus in the Underworld, for example, was first produced in 1858 in France. So it was about the time the Diableries were started, because the first one were made around 1859. Yes, so just after that. There was, in 1858, at one point, there were 10 shows in Paris at the same time related to the devil. And Orpheus in the Underworld was one of them.
And he appears, Orpheus in the Underworld appears in this series.
Yes, he does.
Yes, there's-
Yes. There are three cards about the story of Orpheus.
It's an appalling play, isn't it? Have you ever seen it? Anybody ever seen it? It's really it's falling. I guess it's funny.
Was the Musée Grévin open at this time? Does it have any?
No, it was a bit later. Musée Grévin was just a bit later after the Franco-Prussian War. So, yeah.
Thanks.
The quick question I've got out of this is that looking at it, I can see just in the way they've put things together completely different in framing than you would say for any of the modern sort of 3D films that have come out. And I'm wondering whether, because it was brought out at a time when modern or 2D filming wasn't actually in existence at that stage, could it be that this is possibly closer to how 3D, could we learn something from the way they've framed this towards modern 3D filming?
By framing, do you mean where things
are placed within the staging of this whole thing?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I can see out of that, there is a far greater wholeness to what you're looking at within the images there than you see in many of the different 3D films that have come out. And I'm wondering whether, because of the hangover of 2D framing and the way that things are perceived there coming into 3D, could this be a more pure way of looking at the framing because it hasn't had the influence of 2D filming?
Interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of things you touched on there. I mean, these people were sculptors, of course, and very... Abe certainly was sort of a nationally recognised master, whereas Enetier was, in a sense, probably not recognised and more of the sort of renegade. But they were both masterful sculptors, and if you look at the style at the beginning of the Diableries, it was more or less hewn out of solid rock. It was a slight extension of the sort of bas-relief technique like you would see on the side of churches. So they were actually hewn out of space, and I think the awareness of space comes from that. Eventually they start using discrete figures, but they still have this wholeness of the composition. Yeah, I think that's an important point. I don't know what
Maybe 3D movie makers should start employing sculptors.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, that's an idea.
Yeah.
Because they're used to thinking in 3D.
Yeah, for something like the storyboards, etc. The planning of using sculptors within the planning of that sort of thinking.
And you also have to remember that because they could control the size of these sculptures, I mean, like we said, they were about 8.5, 9 inches tall, and they also had only so much depth of field and everything. They were kind of constrained by some physical elements with the photography, and because they were classically trained, they took advantage of that to make as much depth as they could. We just have to sit back and enjoy it.
Because one of the things, the other thing that just struck me too, was where they were using smaller models to create that extra depth. That also is one of the things that is talked about in Stereo 3D that you cannot do.
Right.
Because so you cannot fake things in 3D, you've got to do them, as opposed to 2D. So therefore, the idea of using all these different things within camera work in 2D, such as in The Hobbit, to create the large and the small, is almost an impossibility within 3D. That's what the general consensus seems to be. Yet here you have someone who is doing it quite successfully.
Well,
but once again, sorry, it's a still image. Yeah, that's
it is still.
Yeah,
But
and it's the artistic tradition of the bas-relief, and that goes far earlier than these sculptors. They were already classically trained and knew that. That was their way of doing that. And if, for example, you were carving something out of wood and not, say, clay, where you could add as much on, you only had so much wood to deal with. So if you really wanted a lot of depth, you really had to do the smaller figures. So they didn't have the luxury of filmmakers today.
Interesting to note that the stereoscopic equipment they used to photograph these scenes, we actually don't know much about. But their interocular separation was a little bit on the high side, so there are a few of these slides which we can't really show because they hurt on the screen. You know, you would have to reduce the effective interocular separation. So there is a huge amount of depth on these images, sometimes just a little bit too much, but it's glorious to see in the stereoscope because that doesn't give you a problem. Yeah, of course they did have all the time to think about it. You know, it's not a moving image. They have all the time to move things around, look at it. And in some cases, there are variants. In some cases, they've changed their mind. They thought, well, we'll just move this guy around here, we'll do this. And there's a fascinating view, which we haven't shown you, of a photography experiment in hell. And there are a couple of different versions of that. One where the camera is just a box, and one where there's a strange device on top of it. And we've never figured out what the device is, because there were no viewfinders in those days, there were no shutters, so what the hell was it? It's also not a stereo camera, which is a little strange because all their thoughts are in the stereoscopic medium. So that's worth looking at in the book.
Okay.
Early on, you had an early English or British Diablerie made with real skeletons, and then the French with the carvings. Are there and some of them were religious, some were political. Are there any things that you've seen from America that were at the same time with the same type of things? Most of the things I see of America are the scenes from realistic life, everyday types of things.
The Americans copied the French tissues, actually, and sold the bootleg copies, but that's what they did, that's all.
No. As an American, we didn't have anything nearly as creative as that at that time.
No, I hadn't seen
Certainly
them
with
myself.
skeletons.
I
No.
just hadn't seen them where they weren't there at all.
Not very French.
Yeah, the significant studies of that time in America were the Civil War and the Last Rail and things like that.
Sure.
A lot of
It was
that, a lot
very
of historical
documentary,
events
yeah.
documented in 3D, but not very, and some portraits, some wonderful portraits.
Sure.
But really, no, not a little bit in the New York Stereoscopic
Yes,
Company, right? A
some-
little bit
some
of
things.
tableau making, but nothing like this.
Do you know how long did the last production and why did it stop? Or,
Why did they stop? We really don't know. They got to.
Well, the Diableries started in 1859 and ended around 1896, so just when the cinema was invented. So, and then came Méliès, and Méliès acted in many films where he was actually playing the devil, and skeletons were dancing and moving. So I think that's what naturally replaced the Diableries. But interestingly, they were published until the 1910s. So. For over 60 years.
one more question. Why do you think is France playing the main kind of role in this Méliès as well?
Yes, why France?
Yes,
Yeah,
well, first thing, I think because it was a Catholic country, and so the fear of the devil was very important, even at the time, even in 1860. I mean, in 1859, a very famous priest died, and he had been in the habit of not forgiving your sins if you ever went dancing. So it was 1859. He died, and he was famous for that. He would not forgive you your sins if you were going to dance later on. So it was still very strong, the fear of the devil, and people were very, very interested at the time in everything devilish and about hell. But there was a slight change. People were trying to make the devil a little less scary and a bit more funny, actually. And then, yes, it ended because of the cinema, probably.
In commercial terms, of course, today we're so used to taking even 3D pictures in a fraction of a second. Going back in time to the 1850s, I suppose these images which you're showing, in terms of man-hours to produce, must have been the largest, in the world, the largest number of man-hours per image. I've often wondered what the circulation was at the time with the publicity available to them that would enable them to make a commercial success of this. Do we know how many sets were produced?
Yes, we know that. Yeah, we know there's 7 series, but we know very little about how many cards themselves were published. And you mustn't forget that there was a war in France in 1870, so Paris was bombed and things were destroyed all over France. Then we had the same thing in 1914 and then again in 1940. So lots of documents and information disappeared at the time. So it's very difficult to say exactly where or how many of them were published. But yeah, well if they remained popular until 1910, it means that they must have been popular.
But interestingly, they really weren't advertised. Because remember, these were also political, and there wasn't freedom of speech at the time, and they were kind of running a little bit under the wire there. So you can't even judge by how many ads were in how many journals, because they just don't exist. I found only one published reference at the time to them, and that was in a British journal that reviewed them, nothing French. Oh.
Yeah.
There was censorship at the time in France, so it was not a good thing to actually, try to make fun of the regime. So it was a bit underground. Yeah.
It is incredible. Like you're saying, the number of man hours per shot is just beyond belief, really, because you have all the business of the sculpting to start with, setting it all up. You have the photographing, you have the processing of the photograph, and then this colossal bit of technology to make it into a tissue card, and that was done every time. You can't just colour it once and it goes out. You know, every single card has to be coloured on the back, has to be pricked out exactly perfectly, has to be so. And it is almost impossible to imagine how it was commercially viable, but I guess it was, because they did it. I guess labour was very cheap as well.
We think that maybe that's one of the reasons that they started to reuse some of the sculptures, because they didn't have to make them all over and over. They could just reuse them, one from column A and two from column B.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. As Denis was alluding to, it was seems it was something of a seditious act, producing these cards. So are there any records of people being arrested or
not for the Diableries? Yeah, not for the Diableries, but Lamish, the first publisher of the Diableries, he was obviously against Napoleon III, and the police found ways of arresting him, and he spent 4 months in prison, but for another reason. He was publishing naughty pictures as well, naughty stereos. Yeah.
But nothing directly related?
No, nothing directly related.
They seem to have got away with it.
Yeah, they got away. Yeah, because, Lamish was a very clever guy. The first 22 Diableries he copyrighted, he took them with 14 slides representing the Stations of the Cross. So he made a bundle, and he copyrighted everything. So they looked, the censors looked at the 14 Stations of the Cross, and then they saw mostly religious views. The first one, and a few of them were not at all religious and very seditious. Satan's women's bathing, for example, is very seditious. But the censors just looked at a few of them, and they let them go. So that's how he managed. He escaped prison by that time. He was very clever. And stereos are very small, you mustn't forget that. So it's easier to, if people don't actually look at them in a stereoscope, they won't see all the details. So a lot of things, went through like that. Yeah.
Hello, hi. How did you all come across the images? Did you find them in a flea market? Did you read about them first? Was it? But what's your own story about how you found them? How you discovered them?
Well, we all have different stories.
Okay, you first.
Me, it was 40 years ago or probably more, in Portobello Road Market. I used to go around there every Saturday morning early to see what I could find, anything stereoscopic, because I was sort of bitten by the bug. And this particular street trader had a bunch of cards, a stack, and there were 2 in that stack which were devils, the Diableries. I'd never seen anything like it in my life, and I held them up to the light and saw what happened. It's pure magic. I had no idea what they were about. So I think in my mind, for the rest of my life, I was really obsessed with the idea of finding out the truth about what they were and collecting them. I think I was probably the second person in the 20th century to accrue a whole collection of the first series. And a wonderful guy called Paul Wing in America helped me to complete the series. But really, I did not know the undercurrent of ideas that were contained in them until I met Denis. And that's the reason we were able to publish this book. But Denis will have a different story.
Paula first.
Oh, Paula first. Yes.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a specialist in photography of the Native American Indians, so that's clear. Well, maybe not.
Nothing to do with it.
At the Smithsonian, obviously, I couldn't collect Indian views, so I started collecting British stereos. And when you go to these shows, you come across many things. And the first time you see a Diablerie, you go, I don't know what it is, but I have to have it. And then after a bit, you realize, well, they're numbered, and then you start filling them in. And I don't know how long ago I started collecting them, but got a significant collection, and Brian and I met up for another project, and we had fun just comparing notes and dreaming of doing a Diablerie book, and I found him. Because I knew we didn't know enough.
Yeah, well, my story is completely different. I was always interested in researching things, and when I started collecting stereos, I started asking around, and people didn't know anything about stereo, who the photographers were. So I started going to Paris at the Bibliothèque Nationale, and I worked there for several years, and there was this wonderful guy called Bernard Marbeau, who was the curator there, and he watched me work for years, and one day he came up to me and said, okay, I've been watching you. I know you will never let go, so would you like to catalog the stereoscopic collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale? I said, yes, of course, yeah, I would love that. And there were 33,000 stereos, and among them, they had about half of the Diableries, and I was amazed when I saw them, of course, even though they were not very good quality, and that's how it began. Yeah, for me. And so I wanted to know who the guys were, so I started looking who Albert and Ennetier were, and then years and years later, I was fortunate enough to meet Brian and Paula, and the dream came true.
I think that's all we've got time for.
Okay. It's all right.
Thank you very much.